Hello, I'm Paul Peterson. I'm the editor-in-chief at EducationNext, and I have with me our executive editor, Martin West, who works with me on the poll, as does William Howell, that EducationNext and the Program on Education Policy and Governance at Harvard University have been jointly conducting over the past few years. And this year we looked especially at the question, are political parties deeply divided on education questions? We hear about polarization in American politics over abortion and gay rights and gay marriage and so many other hot-button issues. But the question is, are Americans fighting over education policy on partisan lines? Do Democrats and Republicans disagree a lot? And we've got some pretty interesting findings. So Marty, what would you say is the most interesting? Well, what do they disagree the most about, the two parties?
There are some clear areas of disagreement. In particular, questions about school spending. So Democrats are much more likely to favor increased spending, increased local taxes to support public schools than are Republicans. And then most prominently, they disagree about questions of teacher tenure. So when we ask them whether they support the practice of teacher tenure, Democrats are much more likely to support that than are Republicans. We also asked them, it's not a policy question, about their view of the influence of teachers' unions on schools and their community. And not surprisingly, given the role that teachers' unions play in the Democratic Party, Democrats are much more likely to see unions as having a positive influence in the schools of their community than are Republicans. But I think focusing on the areas of disagreement actually obscures the real finding, which is that if we look across the entire suite of issues that we ask people about, there is a lot of agreement between the parties rather than disagreement.
So if they disagree on unions, they disagree on spending, they disagree on taxing, these are all sort of common areas of disagreement between the two political parties. What do they agree on?
Well, both Republicans and Democrats still seem to be quite comfortable with the idea of test-based accountability for students and schools when we ask about graduation exams, about exams used to decide whether a student can move from one grade to the next.
Not a surprise that President Obama is supporting keeping the Bush plan pretty much intact.
That's right. I think there continues to be both strong overall support and a good deal of consensus between the parties on those issues. Also on the question of merit pay, there's very little disagreement there. Overall levels of support are a bit more mixed, but the divide seems to be within rather than between the parties, perhaps reflecting the fact that Obama has taken a position on this issue and has been quite supportive of the idea. Similarly on charter schools, we see support just about even between the parties. Republicans a bit more supportive of the idea, but again,
so the charter schools are picking up support from both political parties. Is this going to become a popular issue across the board?
Well, we don't know yet. We know that there's more support in areas where charters are located, and we know that there's not a lot of disagreement between the two parties, but there's still quite a bit of debate within the parties.
Well, one of my favorite topics is online learning because I think that's the wave of the future. We're going to have a lot more courses offered online. So how do the parties line up on that issue?
Democrats are a bit more enthusiastic about the idea of online learning, but not much. Again, an area where there's more agreement than disagreement. Interestingly, also, Democrats are more supportive of tax credits for educational expenses, which can be used to expand access to private schools, and of school vouchers. So when you ask ordinary Democrats about their views of private school choice, it seems to be quite different from what you hear among elected officials of both parties. And I mean, that's true of Republicans as well.
But it probably isn't a big difference on that. It seems to me that's not a big difference between the two parties on those issues.
It's not as large as salaries, but it's considerably larger than what we see on questions of accountability, where there's just a consensus across the board.
Well, I would call it a perverse disagreement between the parties because the leaders of the parties are taking a position opposite of their rank and file members.
That's right.
So,
and again, it reflects the role of organized interests in addition to, the public at large in shaping views on these issues.
So if you would say that putting spending issues to one side and unions to one side, if you look at accountability and charters and merit pay, is there a possibility that we could get bipartisan support for major education reform, regardless of what happens in the next election?
It does seem like there's room for a political leader to craft an agenda that would be able to win support among both parties. Of course, you know, there's a lot of distance between what's possible and what's actually obtained, and it'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
Well, thank you, Marty. Fun chatting with you.